It was a quiet night, the kind I had grown used to lately. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen, wiped down the counters, and prepared the leftovers from dinner. It was a habit now, working my way through the motions after a long day at the office, keeping myself busy with little things so I wouldn't have to think too much. I was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through some papers, mostly bills and account statements, and sipping on the last of my tea when the phone rang. It wasn't a number I recognized, but I didn't hesitate to pick it up. It could be a call about a family member or a work-related issue. Lately, I hadn't been feeling present enough in my own life. I didn't want to miss anything important, even if it felt like too much to handle sometimes. I glanced down at the caller ID, unknown number. Something about it made me uneasy, like a knot twisting inside my chest. I hesitated for a moment, but then I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mrs. Thompson?" came a man's voice, crisp and formal, but with an undertone of urgency that made my stomach flip. "This is Mark Harris, from Harris Financial Advisory. I'm calling after hours because there's something important we need to discuss about your investments." My heart skipped a beat. Mark Harris was my financial advisor, the man I'd trusted with every penny I'd earned for the past 5 years. I hadn't expected a call from him at this hour, especially with everything else going on in my life. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice a little shaky despite myself. "Why are you calling so late?" There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I'm afraid I've discovered something that needs your immediate attention, but I need you to understand that this is sensitive information." I felt the knot tighten in my chest. "Sensitive," I repeated, my pulse quickening. "What's going on?" Mark sighed heavily on the other end of the line, almost as if he was bracing himself for what he was about to say. "I need to be very clear with you, Mrs. Thompson. There are some serious discrepancies with your accounts. Some of your investments are in jeopardy. I don't want you discussing this with your son, Daniel, yet. It's important that you understand what's happening before you share any of this with him." My mind raced. My son? Why couldn't I tell Daniel? This wasn't a secret I wanted to keep. My relationship with Daniel had always been open, direct. Why would Mark tell me not to talk to my son about something so serious? The thought made me uneasy. "Why can't I tell Daniel?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep calm. "He's my son. He's old enough to understand. What's going on?" I could hear Mark take a deep breath before he spoke again. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Thompson, but right now I need you to trust me. There are some irregularities in the portfolio. Your son? He's not ready for this information yet. I'll explain everything in detail when we meet, but for now, I need to ensure you understand the severity of the situation before we take any next steps. You'll need to act quickly." My mind was spinning. What could possibly be wrong with my investments? My life savings, my retirement funds, I had trusted Mark with everything. The thought that something could be wrong made my chest tighten. I felt a wave of panic rising within me. "What do you mean? Are we talking about losses? Is my money at risk?" Mark's voice was measured and calm, but there was a sharpness to it that I hadn't heard before. "I'm afraid I can't go into full details over the phone, Mrs. Thompson. All I can say for now is that you need to meet with me as soon as possible. I'll make myself available at your convenience, but I need to warn you, time is critical here." My hands were shaking as I held the phone, trying to process what he was saying. "When can we meet?" I asked, my voice quiet. "I can meet with you tomorrow afternoon, Mrs. Thompson," Mark said. "I'll have everything ready to explain the situation in full. Please, don't talk to Daniel until we've discussed this. I'll handle things on my end, but it's important that you understand the full scope of what's going on first." I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand an explanation right then and there, but I could hear the urgency in his voice. I could hear that something was wrong, something bigger than I could comprehend. "Okay," I said quietly, my mind racing. "Tomorrow I'll see you then." After hanging up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. The silence around me felt oppressive. The usual calm of my house was gone, replaced by a feeling I couldn't quite name. I couldn't shake the thought of what Mark had said. "Don't discuss this with your son." Why couldn't I tell Daniel? Why was it so urgent that I keep this from him? The next day, I barely slept. I tossed and turned through the night, my thoughts consumed with questions. What was going on with my investments? Why hadn't I noticed anything unusual, and why couldn't I tell Daniel? The last thing I wanted was to keep secrets from him. He was always there for me, always supportive. This didn't feel right. By morning, I was a bundle of nerves. I tried to focus on getting ready for the meeting with Mark, but my mind kept drifting back to those words. Don't discuss this with your son. What if Mark was hiding something? What if he had made a mistake? I didn't want to believe that, but the more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense. I trusted him, but I didn't know him. What if he had been taking advantage of me all this time? I pushed those thoughts aside. There was no time for doubts. I had to figure this out. I had to understand what was going on and why I couldn't tell Daniel. I arrived at the office just before our scheduled meeting. Mark's office was sleek, modern, nothing like the small, cozy spaces I was used to. It was intimidating, with high ceilings and glass walls, making me feel small as I walked through the door. Mark was already there, waiting for me. He smiled as I walked in, but his eyes were dark. There was a tension in his shoulders, like he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, standing up to greet me, "I'm glad you could make it. Please have a seat." I sat down across from him, my heart pounding in my chest. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I waited for him to speak first. Mark cleared his throat and leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "I want to get straight to the point. I've reviewed your portfolio, and there are some irregularities I need to address. Unfortunately, they're more serious than I originally thought." I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean by irregularities? Mark hesitated, then slid a folder across the desk to me. "Here are the details. The investments I made on your behalf have been mismanaged. Some of the choices I made were too risky, and now several of your assets are underperforming." I opened the folder, flipping through the pages filled with numbers and jargon I didn't completely understand. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of the charts, the graphs, and the financial terms. Nothing seemed to add up. "How did this happen?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Mark looked away, his gaze flickering nervously. "I've been trying to manage the situation quietly, without causing panic. I thought I could fix it without involving you, but now it's beyond my control. And I need to be honest with you." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Beyond your control? What do you mean by that?" He leaned back in his chair, his face tight. "There's a possibility that some of your assets may be lost if we don't act quickly. I've already made arrangements to reallocate your investments, but we need to move fast. I can't promise that everything will be salvaged." I felt like the room was closing in on me. My head spun, the walls around me pressing in. I tried to steady my breath, but it was difficult. "How could you let this happen?" I asked, my voice breaking. "You were supposed to protect my money. You were supposed to be the expert." Mark ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "I know, Mrs. Thompson, I made a mistake, and I regret it, but I'm doing everything I can to fix it. I need you to trust me to handle this, and I promise you we will try to minimize the damage." The words hung in the air, cold and hollow. I looked down at the folder in front of me, feeling the weight of the betrayal settle into my chest. I felt small. I felt powerless. But then something inside me stirred. A quiet voice, one I hadn't heard in a long time, whispered to me, "This is not the end." I looked up at Mark, my eyes steady. "I trusted you, but this is my future, my son's future, and I can't let you handle it on your own anymore." Mark's eyes widened in surprise, but I didn't give him the chance to speak. I stood up, grabbed the folder, and placed it back in my bag. "I'm done," I said firmly. "I'm going to take my business elsewhere. I can't risk having my finances controlled by someone who's been so careless." Mark looked at me, his face pale. "Mrs. Thompson, please, let's not do this." "No," I said, my voice stronger now. "You don't get to make the decisions for me anymore. I'm taking control of my own future." With those words, I walked out of his office, my head held high. As I left the building, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: empowerment. I had taken back control. I had made the decision. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I knew that my future was mine again. I didn't need Mark's reassurance anymore. I didn't need anyone to tell me what I could or couldn't do. I just needed to trust myself. And that's exactly what I was going to do. The next few days felt like a blur. I woke up every morning with a weight on my chest, but not the kind I was used to. It wasn't the usual hum of my life, the busy workdays, the grocery lists, the emails I'd been ignoring, the mundane. No, it was something deeper, something heavy that weighed down every thought and made everything feel out of place. I couldn't stop thinking about the phone call from Mark. I couldn't stop thinking about the words that were said, the implications that followed. Don't discuss this with your son. The moment he had said that, I felt something break inside me. I wasn't sure what it was at first. It didn't quite feel like betrayal. It felt more like control, like Mark was trying to keep me in the dark, like I was too fragile to handle the truth. But it wasn't just about me, it was about Daniel too. My son, the one I had worked so hard to give a better life to. Why couldn't I tell him? I kept running through the details over and over in my head. I had always thought I was in control of my finances. I had trusted Mark to help me grow our investments, to be the one who steered our money in the right direction. But the truth had been so far from what I imagined. The cracks that I'd ignored, suddenly, they were gaping wide open. The worst part? I felt stupid. I had spent years feeling proud of my financial stability, confident that everything was fine, only to find out I had been blind to the very systems that should have protected us. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up the phone one morning, knowing what I had to do. I was going to call Mark. I was going to demand answers, and I wasn't going to back down. The phone rang a few times before Mark picked up, his voice warm and friendly as usual. "Mrs. Thompson, good morning. I was just about to call you. How are you today?" "Not well, Mark," I said, cutting him off before he could continue with his pleasantries. "We need to talk, now." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then he exhaled, like he knew exactly what was coming. "Of course," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "What's on your mind?" I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't going to be an easy conversation. It wasn't just about investments anymore. It was about trust. It was about the lies that had been told to me and the fact that he thought I wouldn't notice. "I want you to explain what's going on with my accounts. What you didn't tell me," I said, each word deliberate and firm. "I want to know everything." There was another silence. This time, it was long, stretched heavy. Finally, Mark cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thompson, I think we need to meet in person. This isn't something I can explain over the phone. I'd like to go over everything with you in detail." I stared at the phone, gripping it harder. "I don't need another meeting, Mark. I need answers, right now." "I understand, but this is delicate," he said, his voice shifting to a more serious tone. "Let me explain it all to you face to face, and we can discuss the next steps. You're going to need to trust me on this." I bit back the frustration that was rising in my throat. He had no idea what it felt like to be blindsided by someone you trusted. "Trust you?" I repeated slowly. "I trusted you with everything, Mark, my family's future. And now I find out you've made decisions without telling me, decisions that could cost me everything." Mark paused again, then said, "I never meant for this to happen, but I can explain everything when we meet. I promise you, it's not as bad as it seems." I almost hung up right then, but I held myself together. "I'll meet you this afternoon," I said, my voice cold. "But this conversation doesn't end until I have full transparency. No more secrets." "Of course," he said, the tension in his voice clear. "I'll see you then." I hung up, feeling the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. The meeting was set, but the anger inside me didn't fade. It only grew. I spent the rest of the day packing. My mind kept racing, going over everything Mark had said and hadn't said, the irregularities, the mismanaged investments, the money that could be lost. How could I have missed this? How could I have been so blind? The worst part was that I hadn't even realized the extent of my ignorance until now. I thought I was doing everything right. I thought Mark had everything under control. But now, everything felt like a lie. The foundation of my financial security was built on shaky ground, and I had been too trusting to see it. When I arrived at Mark's office later that afternoon, the air was thick with tension. The modern glass building, the sleek furniture, it all felt cold and impersonal. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and the last thing I wanted was to sit down with Mark and pretend everything was going to be fine. He was waiting for me in his office, a glass of water in front of him, his usual warm smile replaced by something a little more nervous. "Mrs. Thompson, thank you for coming in," he said, standing up as I walked in. "Please have a seat." I didn't sit. I remained standing, looking him in the eye. "I'm not here for pleasantries, Mark," I said, my voice sharp. "I'm here to get answers." He nodded, swallowing nervously. "I understand. I'll explain everything to you. I think there's been some misunderstanding." I crossed my arms, staring at him. "Don't lie to me. I want the truth. I want to know what happened to my investments, and I want to know why you kept this from me." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze flickering to the desk and back to me. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand that you're upset, but this is a complicated situation. I made decisions that I thought were in your best interest. I never meant for things to spiral out of control like this." I couldn't help it. I laughed bitterly. "Spiral out of control? That's the understatement of the year. You've put my entire future at risk, and you're telling me it was all for my best interest." His face reddened slightly. "I know this looks bad, but please let me explain. There were some investments that didn't perform as expected. There were some risks we took that didn't pay off. But I've been working hard to recover the losses, and I think we can turn things around." "You think," I repeated. "And you didn't think it was important to tell me that my money was being mismanaged. You didn't think I should be included in these decisions." Mark shifted in his chair, his hands trembling slightly. "I was trying to protect you. I didn't want to worry you. I thought I could handle it without causing panic." I shook my head slowly. "You thought you could handle it. You were gambling with my future, Mark, my son's future." He looked away for a moment, then back at me. "I made mistakes, Mrs. Thompson, but I swear I'm doing everything I can to fix this. I've already started working on a plan to recover the losses. We'll be okay." I felt the anger bubbling up again. I had trusted him. I had given him everything, and he had let me down. He had allowed my financial security to become something fragile and unstable. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "No, I'm done with this. I'm done with you, Mark." His eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I'm pulling all of my accounts," I said, my voice steady. "I'm moving everything to someone else, someone who can actually manage my money and be honest with me." Mark looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find the right words. "You can't do this," he said, almost pleading. "I'm the one who's been helping you all these years. You trust me, don't you?" I shook my head. "I did trust you, but that trust is gone." I stood up, taking one last look at him. "I'll be in touch with my new advisor. Don't contact me again." Without waiting for a response, I walked out of his office. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I felt a strange sense of peace. The first step was done. I had taken control. I had stopped letting someone else dictate my future. Now I was going to fix things. In the weeks that followed, I kept busy. I called my new financial advisor, and we started from scratch. We reviewed everything, every account, every investment. We made a new plan, a solid one, a real one. But it wasn't just my finances I was fixing. It was my life. I started looking at everything differently. I began to let go of the guilt I'd been carrying around, the belief that I had somehow failed because of Mark's mistakes. I focused on building something strong, something I could trust. And as I did that, something else started to shift. I started to focus on myself. I made time for things I had neglected for years. I joined a book club. I went out with friends. I learned to enjoy my own company, something I had forgotten how to do. And with each passing day, I felt stronger. I felt like I was finally starting to put the pieces of my life back together. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer afraid. I had found my power again. And this time, I wasn't giving it up. The days after that meeting with Mark felt like a blur of confusion, hurt, and a sense of betrayal that I couldn't shake. But there was something else, something beneath all the pain, clarity. For the first time, I realized I was more than just the woman who had been wronged. I was the one who had to make things right, not with Mark, not with anyone else, but with myself. I hadn't been living for me. I had been living for everyone around me. My son, my husband, even Mark. Trying to keep everything balanced, trying to make sure I didn't ruffle feathers, trying to keep everyone comfortable. But the reality was, The only one who wasn't comfortable was me. It was like a fog had been lifted. The weight that had sat on my chest for so long, the weight of constantly compromising, constantly adjusting to make others happy, began to dissipate slowly but surely. I didn't realize how heavy it was until it was gone. That evening, after I left Mark's office, I went home and sat down at my desk. The stack of papers from the meeting, the account statements, the investment plans, everything was scattered across the surface. I stared at it, feeling a little overwhelmed but also strangely determined. I wasn't going to let anyone control my future anymore, not even myself. The phone buzzed on my desk. It was a message from Daniel. "Daniel, hey mom, how are you? Just checking in, everything okay?" I paused for a moment before typing a response. "Me, I'm good, just busy with some things, but I'll be fine." I sat back in my chair after sending it. I hated how I kept shielding him. Daniel deserved the truth. He deserved to know what was going on, especially with everything that had happened in the past few days. But I wasn't ready to unload that on him just yet. I had to handle it myself first. As I stared at the screen, I realized how much of my life had been lived in reaction. I had spent so much time worrying about what would happen if I made a mistake, what people would think of me, how things would affect everyone else. I had lost track of what I wanted, what I needed. I picked up the phone again. This time, I dialed a number I hadn't thought about in years. "Hello," a familiar voice answered, and I instantly recognized it. "Hi, Dad," I said softly. There was a pause before he spoke again. "Sarah, is everything okay?" I smiled at the concern in his voice. "Yeah, just needed to talk." "Of course, sweetheart, what's going on?" I sat up straighter, feeling the weight of his words. "I'm tired, Dad. I'm tired of pretending everything is fine. I feel like I've been living in this fog, this constant state of worry, trying to keep everyone else happy and forgetting about myself. I don't know how to fix it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sometimes the first step is to admit it, honey. You've been carrying too much, and it's okay to put some of it down." I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in his words. "I don't know how to do that," I whispered. "You're stronger than you think," he replied, his voice filled with warmth. "And you've been strong for so long. But sometimes letting go doesn't mean weakness, it means growth." I let out a breath, realizing how much I needed to hear that. "Thanks, Dad. I think I needed to hear that more than anything." "Anytime," he said. "Take care of yourself, you've got this." I hung up the phone and sat there for a long while. The weight was still there, but now it didn't feel as heavy. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of what came next. I wasn't scared of being alone in this process. The following days were a whirlwind of paperwork and phone calls. I met with my new financial advisor, Angela, who was kind but professional, someone who actually listened to my concerns. We went over the mess Mark had made, and with Angela's help, I started making sense of everything. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But for the first time in a long time, I was in control of my finances, not letting anyone make decisions for me. It was freeing, in a way, to know I had the tools to fix this. The best part? I didn't have to do it alone. I could lean on Angela for advice and guidance, but I was the one making the choices. And as I worked through the financial details, I realized something important. This wasn't just about money. This was about my life, about taking back the parts of myself that had been buried under years of someone else's decisions. I was done letting others dictate my path. One evening, about a week later, Daniel called again. "Hey, Mom, I've been thinking. I want to talk to you about something." I sat up straighter, curious. "Sure, what's on your mind?" "I know you've been stressed lately, and I don't know what's going on, but I can tell something's up," he said, his voice gentle but direct. "I don't want to push, but I want you to know that I'm here. Whatever it is, we can talk about it." I felt a lump form in my throat. My son had always been a rock for me, but this moment felt different. He was growing up, becoming someone I could lean on, too, and I hadn't realized how much I needed that until now. I swallowed hard before answering. "Daniel, I think it's time we talked." The next day, we sat down at the kitchen table. The conversation I had been avoiding for so long was finally happening. I wasn't sure how to start, but Daniel's calm presence made it easier. "Mom, you know I'm not a little kid anymore," Daniel said, looking me in the eye. You don't have to protect me from everything. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of pride and guilt. I know, I just didn't want to burden you with everything that's been happening. He took my hand, his grip firm but gentle. I'm your son, it's my job to be here for you too. Tears filled my eyes as I looked at him, my heart swelling with love. There's been a lot going on. I've been working through some things with the finances, but it's not just that, Daniel. It's everything. The years of pretending everything was fine when I was okay. I've been hiding parts of myself from you, from everyone, and I'm sorry for that. Daniel looked at me with a thoughtful expression. Mom, you've always been there for me. You've done everything for me. I don't think I could ever be mad at you for anything. But I think you've been holding on to a lot of pain. You don't have to do it alone. I squeezed his hand, finally letting myself break down, finally letting the weight of it all pour out. The tears came hard, but they didn't feel like weakness. They felt like release. You've grown up so much, I said through tears. I don't deserve you, Daniel. He smiled softly. You don't have to deserve me. I'm your son. You've always been enough for me. That moment changed everything for me. I realized that I didn't have to carry everything alone. Not anymore. Not with my son, not with my family, not with anyone. I had people who cared, and I had the strength to stand up for myself. After that conversation, I started to look at my life differently. The choices I had made, the mistakes I had allowed, the way I had neglected myself, all of it became clear. But now I was doing something about it. I took the first steps toward healing, not just financially, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I started reconnecting with old friends, the ones I had pushed away because I was too consumed with holding everything together. I started going to therapy, talking to someone who could help me unpack everything I had buried for years. And through it all, I kept reminding myself that I deserved better. I deserved peace. I deserved happiness. And most of all, I deserved to be in control of my own life again. A few months later, I sat in my living room, staring at the check I had just received from the final settlement. The financial mess Mark had created had been resolved, thanks to the hard work of my new financial advisor and my determination to take control. My investments were back on track, and I could finally breathe without the weight of uncertainty. But it wasn't just the money, it was everything. The lessons I had learned, the strength I had rediscovered, the self-respect I had built. I had taken my life back piece by piece. I looked up as Daniel walked into the room, a smile on his face. He had been my anchor through it all. And now, he was growing into someone I could admire just as much as he admired me. Hey, Mom, he said, sitting down next to me. I think you're stronger than anyone I know. I smiled, my heart swelling. You're a pretty strong guy yourself, you know. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being there with each other. I had come so far. I had rebuilt myself. I had chosen myself. And in doing so, I had created a future I could be proud of. And as I sat there, next to my son, I knew this was just the beginning. The beginning of a new chapter where I was finally in control. The following days felt like I was walking in a fog, but not the same kind of fog that had clouded my thoughts before. No, this time, it was more like the kind you pass through when you've just left a storm behind. It was still a little dark, still a little uncertain, but the worst of it was over. I'd made the decision, I'd confronted Mark, I'd signed the papers. Now it was all about the aftermath, the rebuilding, the slow, steady steps toward a life that was mine again. That night after the meeting with Mark, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing. I thought about the conversation we had, the words I had said, the way his face had hardened when I told him I was done. I had expected anger, maybe even guilt. But what I saw was something colder, disbelief. As if I wasn't allowed to make this decision. As if I was supposed to be his wife, the one who accepted everything, forgave everything, and didn't question. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't the one who stayed quiet when my needs were ignored. I wasn't the one who smiled through pain just to keep the peace. I had made a choice. I had chosen myself. I woke up the next morning and went through the motions, coffee, emails, getting ready, but my mind was in a different place. For the first time in a long time, I felt awake. I felt aware. The fog had lifted, and I could see everything clearly. But it didn't mean I had it all figured out. I knew what I needed to do next. I had to make a real plan. I had to find my footing. And more than anything, I had to make sure that I wasn't doing this alone anymore. I had Daniel, of course, but I had to rely on myself more than I ever had before. The first step was taking my finances into my own hands. I spent the next few days meeting with Angela, my new financial advisor. She was calm, understanding, and most importantly, transparent. She didn't make me feel small for asking questions. She didn't treat me like I couldn't handle things. "Let's start fresh," she said, as we sat down in her office, looking at all the documents Mark had sent over. "We'll go through every account, every investment, and every asset you have. You deserve to know exactly where your money stands." And that's exactly what we did. Angela spent hours with me, explaining everything in terms I could understand. I asked questions. I took notes. I asked more questions. And slowly, the sense of control started to come back. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was drowning in a sea of numbers and jargon. I felt empowered. I remember sitting there, looking at all the charts and plans, and realizing something. For years, I had trusted Mark to handle everything. I had trusted him with my money, with our future, and even with the things I didn't understand. But now, I was taking control of it all. I wasn't just following someone else's lead anymore. I was making my own decisions. "You're doing great," Angela said, noticing my furrowed brow as I studied the numbers. "The most important thing is that you're here. You're taking the steps you need to make sure your future is secure." I smiled faintly. I feel like I've been asleep for a long time. "You're waking up," she replied, her tone encouraging. And in that moment, I realized something else. I wasn't just rebuilding my finances, I was rebuilding myself. A few days later, I finally told Daniel what had happened. I had been holding off, unsure of how to explain everything to him. I didn't want to burden him with the details of my mistakes, my failures, but I knew I couldn't keep this from him. He deserved to know the truth. We sat down at the kitchen table that evening. It was quiet, too quiet. The air felt thick with everything unspoken. I looked at him, my heart heavy with the weight of the conversation. "Daniel," I said softly, "there's something I need to tell you, something I've been keeping from you." He frowned slightly, sensing my unease. "What's going on, Mom?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "It's about the money, the investments, the things I've been trusting Mark to handle." His face went pale. "What happened?" I hesitated, but then I realized I didn't have time to sugarcoat it. I had to be honest. For him, for me. "Mark made some mistakes. Big ones," I said. "Some of the investments we had were mishandled, and we've lost money. I didn't know. I trusted him, but now I'm trying to fix it." Daniel's face grew more serious as I spoke. "What do you mean fix it?" he asked, leaning forward. "I've already started working with a new advisor," I replied. "I'm taking control of everything. I'll make sure we're okay, but I didn't want to keep this from you. You have a right to know." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes wide with concern. But then, slowly, he nodded. "I'm glad you told me, Mom," he said. "And I'm glad you're handling it. I know this can't be easy." I smiled softly, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm handling it," I said, more to reassure myself than him, "and we'll be okay, together." For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was really seeing him, my son, the young man he was becoming. I had always protected him, always tried to shield him from the messes of the world. But this time, it was different. This time, he wasn't the one I was protecting. I had to show him that I could stand on my own 2 feet, that I could protect us both. He gave me a small smile, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. For the first time, I felt like I was being the kind of parent I had always wanted to be. Honest, strong, unafraid to show my vulnerabilities. A few weeks later, things began to settle down. I was still working on getting my finances in order, but with Angela's help, I felt like I was on the right path. I was learning, growing, and most importantly, I was taking responsibility for the life I had built. One evening, after a long day of work and meetings, I sat on the couch, reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartache, the struggle, it had all been so overwhelming. But somehow I had come out the other side. Stronger, more confident, more determined. I looked around the living room, the space that had once felt so stifling. Now it felt like a place where I could breathe. I wasn't just existing here anymore. I was living. For the first time in years, I felt like I was really living. My phone buzzed on the table, and I picked it up to find a message from Daniel. Daniel, hey Mom, I just wanted to let you know that I'm really proud of you. You've been handling all of this so well. I know it's been tough, but you're doing great. Tears welled in my eyes as I read the message. I hadn't expected it, but I needed to hear it. I needed to know that I wasn't alone in this, that my son saw me. I sent him a message back, my hands trembling slightly as I typed. Thank you, Daniel. I'm proud of you too. You're growing into an amazing young man, and I couldn't be more grateful for you. I hit send and sat back, letting the warmth of his words fill me. The next few weeks flew by. My financial situation slowly but surely started to improve. I was finally on track, no longer relying on someone else to manage my money. I was making decisions, learning about investments, and planning for the future, not just for myself, but for Daniel too. One Saturday afternoon, we sat together in the living room, both of us busy with our own projects. Daniel was working on his schoolwork, and I was going over my new investment portfolio. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was juggling too many things. I felt balanced, centered. Daniel looked up from his homework and caught my eye. You know, Mom, he said, I've been thinking. I looked up at him curious. What about? I know you've been through a lot, he said, but I think you're doing an amazing job. You're not just handling the finances. You're handling everything, and you're doing it like a pro. My heart swelled with pride. I wanted to tell him everything, the struggles, the tears, the hard moments, but he didn't need to know all that. He just needed to see that I was okay. I'm trying, Daniel, I said quietly. I'm doing the best I can. You're doing great, he said again, a soft smile on his face. And I'm here for you always. I smiled back, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And I had him by my side, supporting me every step of the way. As I sat there, looking at my son, I realized that I had done the right thing, not just for me, but for us. I had taken control of my life. I had faced my fears, confronted my mistakes, and learned from them. And now I was walking toward a future I could be proud of. I wasn't alone in this anymore. And I would never let myself feel small again. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and late-night thoughts. It was as though I had entered a whole new world, one where I was the one holding the reins. I had taken control, and yet it felt overwhelming. There were moments when the weight of it all would press down on me, and I would pause, staring out the window, unsure of what to do next. But I had made it this far. I had survived the betrayal, and I was going to get through this. I had to. There was no other choice. Every morning, I woke up to a sense of purpose, a quiet determination to keep moving forward. I still had my son, Daniel, and I still had myself. That was enough for now. I was still figuring it all out, but I was learning to navigate life on my own terms. For the first time in a long time, I was trusting myself to make the right decisions. The fear that had once held me back was starting to fade. It didn't disappear entirely, but it no longer controlled me. One of the things I started doing was reaching out to old friends. I hadn't realized how much I had isolated myself over the years. My life had been consumed by work, by keeping up with everything, by trying to hold it all together. And in the process, I had pushed away the people who cared about me the most. So one afternoon, I called Rachel, an old friend from college. We hadn't talked in years, but when she picked up the phone, it felt like no time had passed at all. Rachel, I said, my voice cracking slightly, it's me, Sarah. Sarah, she exclaimed, her voice warm and familiar. Oh my God, it's been ages, how are you? I laughed softly, a little surprised at how good it felt to hear her voice again. I've been better, I said honestly, but I think I'm finally starting to figure things out. We talked for nearly an hour, catching up on everything and nothing at all. Rachel didn't ask about the specifics of what had happened with Mark, and I didn't offer the details. I wasn't ready to talk about that yet, but just reconnecting with someone who knew me before everything had become so complicated was a relief. You know, Rachel said toward the end of our conversation, you're one of the strongest people I know, Sarah. Don't forget that. Her words felt like a lifeline, something to hold onto in the storm of everything that had happened. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that until she said it. For so long, I had been questioning my strength, wondering if I was doing the right thing, if I was making the right choices. But hearing someone else affirm my strength made me believe it again. "Thank you," I whispered. I needed to hear that. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a few moments. It felt like I had been holding my breath, waiting for something. Maybe I had been waiting for permission to be strong, to accept that I was doing the best I could with what I had. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need permission. I didn't need anyone else's approval. I was doing it, I was handling it, and that was enough. The following days were filled with small victories. I met with the new financial advisor, Angela, to go over the recovery plan for my investments. She had a steady, calm presence that put me at ease. She explained things in simple terms and gave me the confidence to make decisions I'd been avoiding for years. Together, we worked out a strategy to rebuild my portfolio and protect what was left. By the time we were done, I had a clear plan, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just a bystander in my own life. I was driving the car. I was navigating the road. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about the confidence I was starting to feel in myself. I wasn't just a woman who had been cheated on, who had been betrayed by someone she trusted. I was Sarah, strong, capable, and worthy of a future where I made the decisions. But even as things began to settle in my financial world, there were still moments when the weight of it all hit me. There were nights when I lay awake, thinking about everything I had lost. I thought about the years I had spent trying to fix things for Mark, trying to make him happy, trying to keep the peace. And I thought about the way I had let myself disappear in the process. It was hard to admit that I had allowed myself to become so small, to be so wrapped up in someone else's life that I had forgotten how to live my own. I couldn't change the past, but I could change how I moved forward. I had to. One evening, as I sat in the living room flipping through some paperwork, Daniel walked in. He had a tired look in his eyes, and I knew he had been dealing with his own stresses lately: school, friends, the uncertainty of everything. But as he sat down next to me, he smiled softly, and I couldn't help but smile back. "How's everything going, Mom?" he asked, his voice tentative. He had been walking on eggshells around me since the whole thing with Mark started. I knew he wanted to help, but he didn't know how. I set the papers aside and turned to face him. "It's going better," I said, my voice steady. "I'm figuring things out." He seemed to relax a little, but his eyes were still searching mine. "Are you okay?" I nodded, my heart swelling with love for him. "I'm better than I've been in a long time. You don't have to worry about me, Daniel. I'm handling it." He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Good. I just want to make sure you're okay. I know this whole thing has been hard on you." I smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "You don't need to worry about me, sweetheart. I've got this. I'm doing what I need to do to make sure we're okay." He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a second I saw the boy he used to be, the one who needed his mother to guide him, to make things right. But now he was starting to understand that I wasn't just his protector. I was his partner in this, and I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The weeks went by, and slowly, the life I had once thought was out of my control began to take shape. I was making decisions that mattered. I was taking steps that made me proud. One day, as I was walking through the grocery store, I bumped into an old friend from the neighborhood. Her name was Linda, and we had lost touch over the years. I hadn't realized how much I missed her until she stood in front of me, smiling like no time had passed at all. "Sarah," she exclaimed, "it's been forever. How are you?" I smiled genuinely. "I'm doing really well, actually. I've been busy, but I'm getting everything sorted." She raised an eyebrow. "Sorted? What do you mean?" I hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. "I've been going through a lot lately, but I'm taking control of my life again. I'm not letting anything hold me back." Her eyes softened. "Good for you, you deserve that." We chatted for a few more minutes, and I walked away from the conversation feeling lighter. It wasn't the first time someone had said something kind to me during this journey, but it was one of the first times I had truly felt like I deserved the kindness. One evening, after a particularly long day of work and managing everything, I sat on the couch, finally feeling like I had a moment to breathe. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I picked it up, expecting another work email. But it was a message from Rachel, my old friend. "Rachel, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I know things have been tough, but I just wanted to remind you, you're one of the strongest women I know. Don't ever forget that." I smiled, my heart swelling with gratitude. It was a small message, but it meant the world to me. I typed back, "Thank you, I needed to hear that, more than you know." And I did. I needed to hear that I was strong. I needed to hear that I was capable of so much more than I had ever given myself credit for. It was late when I finally decided to go to bed, but instead of lying there, staring at the ceiling as I had done so many nights before, I lay there in peace. I had done it. I had made it this far. And I wasn't going to stop. I had been given a second chance at my life. A life where I didn't have to hide, where I didn't have to make myself smaller to fit someone else's idea of who I should be. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. I wasn't done with this journey, but I was done doubting myself. I was ready to embrace everything I deserved. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. The weeks that followed were a blur of new beginnings and self-discovery. Everything around me was changing, shifting in ways I had never expected. The house that once felt like a cage of memories now felt more like a space I could truly make my own. My mind was clearer. My heart, though bruised, was stronger. I had started living for myself, something I hadn't done in years. But the changes didn't come without their challenges. The hardest part wasn't facing Mark anymore. It wasn't even the weight of the separation. It was the feeling of vulnerability, the fear of the unknown. What did my future look like? Could I handle it all on my own? And more than anything, could I truly trust myself again after everything had fallen apart? I had been coasting along for so long, letting the current of life pull me wherever it wanted. Now, for the first time, I was paddling against it. And it was hard. Some days, the waves were too big and I felt like I might be swept away. But on other days, I felt the power of my own strength, and that kept me going. One day, I sat in front of my laptop, staring at my bank accounts. Angela, my new financial advisor, had been helping me manage things. She was thorough, patient, and most importantly, she listened. She never made me feel stupid for asking questions, never made me feel like I was wasting her time. But today, I was going through everything on my own. I had a goal. I wanted to feel like I was in control, not just of my finances, but of my future. I had been so wrapped up in the mess of the past few months that I hadn't fully embraced how far I had come. I had started to fix things, to rebuild my life. But the numbers on the screen made me pause. They weren't what I had expected. The investments Mark had put together, risky ones, some that had been disastrous, had eaten away at my savings. But it wasn't the loss itself that stung. It was the feeling that I had let it happen. I had trusted him. I had trusted someone else to handle my future, and I had paid for it. But I wasn't going to sit here and feel sorry for myself anymore. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked to the kitchen. The motion felt almost automatic, but at the same time, it felt like I was taking a step toward something. I wasn't just walking into the kitchen to make tea. I was walking toward the life I was building. I grabbed a mug, filled it with hot water, and then poured in the tea leaves. As I watched the steam rise from the cup, I realized something. I had the power to change this. I had the power to rebuild, and I was going to do it. The next morning, I woke up feeling a little different. The early morning light filtered through the window, and for the first time in a while, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt ready. I had made the decision to take charge of my life, and now it was time to show up for myself. I spent the day working on my finances, but it wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about more than just fixing the mistakes. It was about taking back control, about saying, I am worthy of having everything I've worked for. By the time the evening came, I had completed a few important tasks. I'd made a budget that made sense. I'd cleared out a few lingering debts, and I'd put in place a plan to grow my savings again, little by little. But as I sat back in my chair, staring at the spreadsheets, I realized something that took me by surprise. I wasn't just handling my money, I was handling myself. For so long, I had let my decisions be influenced by others. I had let Mark manage my investments, my future, my life. I had let the fear of making the wrong choice control me. But now I felt empowered. I was making my own choices, and I was doing it with purpose. I went to bed that night with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The fear was still there, lingering at the edges of my mind, but it wasn't the thing that defined me anymore. I had my hand on the wheel, and I was going to steer my life exactly where I wanted it to go. The next week, I made another decision. I was going to tell Daniel everything. It had been too long, and he deserved the truth. I had kept him in the dark for so long, trying to protect him from the mess I had got myself into. But I realized that I couldn't protect him forever. I had to trust him to understand. I had to trust that he could handle the truth just like I had. I called him that afternoon, after he got out of school. "Hey, Mom," he answered. "What's up? Can you come over after dinner? There's something I need to talk to you about," I said, my voice a little tighter than I had intended. But I knew this conversation couldn't wait any longer. "Sure, Mom, I'll be over soon," he said, sounding concerned. When he arrived, he could tell that something was off. I had tried to act normal, but I couldn't hide the tension in my voice. He sat down across from me, his eyes searching mine. "What's going on, Mom?" I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "Daniel, I've been hiding things from you," I said, my voice quiet. "Things about the finances, about Mark. I didn't want to worry you, but I think it's time you knew the truth." His brow furrowed and he leaned forward. "What do you mean? What happened?" I hesitated for a moment, then told him everything. I told him about the affair, about the mismanaged investments, about how I had put my trust in Mark, and how it all came crashing down. I told him about the meetings, the calls, the paperwork. I didn't hold anything back. Daniel listened quietly, his expression serious, but he didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long silence. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice soft. "I didn't know." I smiled faintly. "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want to burden you with it." He shook his head. "You're my mom, I want to help, and I want to be there for you." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I pushed it down. "I'm okay now, Daniel. I'm handling it. I should have told you sooner." He reached across the table and took my hand, his grip firm. "You're not alone, Mom. You never have to be. We're in this together." Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at him. My heart ached with love for him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't carrying this burden alone. My son, my rock, my support, was here with me, just like he always had been. That night, after Daniel had gone home, I sat on the couch, reflecting on everything. My finances were starting to recover, but it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about my heart, my future, and my strength. I thought about all the years I had spent feeling small, uncertain, and afraid. I thought about the mistakes I had made and the ways I had let myself be controlled. But now I saw the truth. I wasn't the same person anymore. I was stronger. I was smarter. I was more capable than I had ever known. I had faced my fears, made hard decisions, and chosen a path that was mine to walk. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. Not because I had someone else to rely on, but because I had learned to rely on myself. As I sat there, I smiled. For the first time in years, I was finally free. Not because I had everything figured out, but because I had stopped waiting for someone to fix it. I was doing it myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest power I could ever have. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more decisions, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't scared of what came next, because I knew that no matter what happened, I had me. And that was enough. The air in the house felt different now. It wasn't just the smell of fresh flowers I had placed on the counter or the quiet hum of the heater running through the walls. It was the space, the silence, the kind that wasn't filled with tension, where every room was quietly waiting to be filled with something new. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to fill it with anything just to make it feel less heavy. I felt content. Even in the silence, I felt like I was finally at peace. My phone buzzed from across the table, snapping me out of my thoughts. I reached for it, surprised to see a message from Daniel. "Daniel, hey Mom, just wanted to check in. You doing okay? Want to grab coffee later?" I smiled. My son had been amazing through all of this, always trying to check on me, always offering support in his own way. It wasn't always easy for him, I knew. Seeing your parents struggle with something like this had to be tough, especially when you couldn't fully understand the depth of it. I typed back quickly. I'm doing better, Daniel. Coffee sounds perfect. Let's do it." It had been a while since we spent time just the two of us, without any distractions. We had a lot to talk about what had happened, about what was next, but also about life, about how everything had shifted and how we were both finding our way. The coffee shop was warm, bustling with the sound of espresso machines and quiet chatter. It was a favorite spot of ours, nothing fancy, but cozy and familiar. I waited for Daniel near the corner, a small table for two by the window. When he walked in, he immediately spotted me. His face lit up with that familiar, easy smile that I loved so much. It felt so good to see him happy again, to see that he was finally finding his own place in the world after everything that had happened. "Mom," he greeted me, giving me a quick hug. "How's it going?" "Better than it was a few months ago," I said, my voice soft but sure. "I'm glad you're here." He smiled, sitting down across from me. "Of course, I'm always here for you, Mom." I could see the warmth in his eyes, the way he genuinely cared. It hit me again, just how much he had grown. He wasn't that kid who needed me to fight his battles anymore. He was becoming the kind of person I hoped he would be, strong, compassionate, and wise beyond his years. We ordered our drinks, and as we waited for them to be prepared, the conversation turned quiet for a moment. I wasn't sure what to say, where to start. So much had happened, and yet there was a peace between us that I wasn't sure how to describe. Finally, Daniel spoke. "You know, I've been thinking a lot," he said, his eyes focused on the table in front of him. "About what happened with Mark, about everything." I looked at him, not knowing what was coming next. "What about it?" He shrugged slightly, glancing up at me. "I've been trying to understand it. At first, I was so angry and I didn't know what to feel. But now, I think I get it. You didn't just go through something hard, you fought through it. You took control, Mom, and I'm proud of you for that." I blinked, taken aback by the weight of his words. "You are." "Of course," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I don't think I could have handled it like you did. I'd probably have just shut down and avoided everything. But you faced it all head on." I felt my heart swell with emotion, and for a moment I had to blink back tears. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. My whole life, I had done everything to protect him, to be the steady force in his life. But hearing that he was proud of me, that he saw my strength, made me realize something. I hadn't just done this for myself. I had done it for him, too. I had done it to show him what real strength looked like, what it meant to pick yourself up, no matter how hard it gets. "I'm proud of you too, Daniel," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've handled everything with such grace. You've been my rock through all of this, and I can't thank you enough." We sat in silence for a moment, just looking at each other. There was so much unspoken between us, so much healing that had taken place quietly, without words. And I realized then that this moment, this simple conversation, was one of the most important ones we'd ever had. Because it wasn't just about the mistakes Mark had made or the mess we were cleaning up. It was about us, about how we had both learned to stand on our own 2 feet together. That evening, as I drove home, I couldn't help but feel like something had shifted. The weight that had been on my shoulders for so long was still there, yes, but it wasn't as heavy as it had been. I had faced it all, the betrayal, the fear, the anger, and now I was ready to move forward. When I arrived at home, I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around. The house felt the same, but it didn't. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was mine. It was where I had started rebuilding, where I had found my strength. It had seen the lowest parts of me, but now it would see the best parts too. I went upstairs to the bedroom, the one Mark and I had shared. I hadn't been able to sleep in there since the day he left, but tonight I decided that I would. I was tired of running from the memories, tired of letting the past define how I lived now. It was time to reclaim this space. As I lay in the bed that night, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but I was closer to being whole again than I had been in a long time. A few days later, I made the call. I had been thinking about it for a while, but I knew it was time. It was time to let go completely. I picked up the phone and dialed Mark's number. The line rang, and I felt my stomach tighten. It had been weeks since we'd spoken, and I wasn't sure what to expect when he picked up. "Hello," his voice sounded strained, like he hadn't been expecting my call. "Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been thinking I'm done." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, he said, "Done with what?" "Done with all of this. The lies, the manipulation. I can't do this anymore." I see, he replied, and there was a bitterness in his voice now, something sharp that hadn't been there before. You're just going to throw everything away. You threw it away, Mark. Not me, I said, my voice firm. I gave you everything I had, I trusted you, and you betrayed me. I'm done being your backup plan. I'm done being someone you could walk away from when things got tough. He didn't say anything for a long time. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, but he didn't respond. I didn't expect him to. He had no words left. There was nothing he could say to undo what had been done. I'm filing for separation, I continued. I'm taking back control of my life. I don't need your promises anymore. I need to move on. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt the last pieces of my heart that I had been holding onto for him finally let go. The decision wasn't easy, but it was clear. I won't be coming back to you, Mark, I said one last time. I'm finished. He was quiet for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. Goodbye, Sarah. I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of those words, but they weren't heavy anymore. They were freeing. The next few months flew by. I kept working on my finances, kept meeting with Angela to make sure everything was on track, but it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about making my life something I could be proud of. I spent more time with Daniel, and we grew even closer. He had always been my anchor, but now I was becoming his too. We spent weekends going to the movies, talking about school, about his future. We talked about everything and nothing at all. And I started dating again, slowly. Not because I was looking for someone to fix me, but because I was ready to let someone new into my life. Someone who could see me for who I was, someone who could appreciate the strength I had found in myself. I wasn't looking for a fairy tale. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I was looking for someone who could walk beside me, as strong and as whole as I was. And I knew now that I deserved that. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally stepping into my own. I had taken my life back. I had healed, I had grown, and I was ready to move forward, stronger, wiser, and more in control of my future than I had ever been before. No more fear, no more regrets. Just freedom. And it felt like the beginning of something beautiful.